name is Eduardo Harari from Spanglish Sports World here on the Spanglish World Network and Single TV channel 250. Remember to please go to the iOS and Android stores and download the Single app so you can watch and enjoy all our programming here on the network. Remember as well that the applications are totally free, so there is no reason why not to download them. Once you download them and enjoy them and had a chance to review our programming, please go back to the stores and leave us a comment and a rating in regards to our programming and application usage. Let us know if they are working correctly, if you like our programming, if you find something that you would like to see more often than none. And remember as well that Single TV can be found through Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and in all smart TVs 2016 and forward. In your screen, you have now see my co-host and my partner in life now, Mr. Ari Shapiro, one of the foremost authorities on podcasting in the sports world and in the news area, political and psychology. Mr. Shapiro, welcome to our line here on Spanglish Sports World.
Eddie, that's like the fourth week in a row that you've used terms like partner in life and, esteemed colleague. I love it. This is great flattery. It's always a pleasure to be here. You know that, especially today because it's Saturday. I don't know what that means. It just feels good.
Yeah, no, it's I have to give flattery when flattery is bound because you
Too much
definitely
flattery.
have been an authority in this area before anyone ever thought about it.
Hey,
So
now that's a compliment. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you recognize that. The older I get, the more I realize it's important to know what the hell you're talking about. In every sense, right? Sports or otherwise.
so let's start with what's making headlines today because tomorrow is the start of the Blue Jays season uh, in Florida. And now fans across this country and across the world that I enjoyed the Fan 590 and its affiliates across will not get the happiness of enjoying those broadcasts any longer. Rogers has decided to forfeit the transmission of those broadcasts, and that's sad.
That's sad. That's pathetic. That's the reality of 2021, isn't it? Right? Like this is a continuation to me of what coronavirus represents, in that it's really exposing the true nature of big business, corporations, individuals. It doesn't matter which lens you put on. Uh, when a media company, remember, a media company goes out and buys the Blue Jays, buys the baseball product, buys the reality of that business, there's so much more to it, right? I mean, Ed, in your own experiences growing up that most of your seminal memories about the Toronto Blue Jays came from listening to Tom Cheek and Jerry Howarth, the great, esteemed, legendary broadcasters, radio broadcasters that broke the mold. And anyone and everyone who's followed, and you know all the names. You can trace it back. Mike Wilner is no longer employed by the company. Ben Wagner has been relegated from the what seemed to be heir apparent to an afterthought. It sounds like he's going to be brewing a lot of coffee and shuffling a lot of paperwork. And then you've got someone like my friend and esteemed colleague, Jesse Goldberg Strasler, who was one of the best the best voted minor league broadcaster of the year last year. And so it's not like you don't have talent, Ed. It's not like they didn't have the option to do something with it. But to wait the day before spring training and put yourself in a situation where you simply get rid of something that is an essential part of what Toronto baseball is all about is such an insult to the fans on so many levels. I mean, really, what are we talking about? How many millions of dollars would it really have taken to keep that part of business up? And if you're going to go ahead and argue that that's the kind of frugality that deserves to exist, considering the nature of coronavirus competition, where you can't go to each park and you can't fly these broadcasters over, the fact that you can do it remotely, the fact that we have the technology to sustain that, and they decided in what was clearly a cost-cutting measure to go with the, what is it, Schulman, Tabler, and who am I forgetting? Our third
Martinez.
fellow, Martinez. Yeah, to go with that triumvirate, you're just saving money. And you and I both know that television simulcasts are not the same. In fact, a lot of people who are radio enthusiasts absolutely abhor it because it's the nature of how you express the moment, right? It's the difference between trying to illustrate something to someone who isn't there and making sure that you frame it properly, to simply talking about what's there and conveying it. This is an insult to people who have relied on the radio for so many reasons, and the voices that come from that radio. Man, it's just a shame. Like, seriously, this is just another unnecessary reason to give people angst in this world. And in this case, it's fans of the Blue Jays. There's no
Yeah,
need
I
for it.
mean, it's, you know, uh, I have always, and let's look at the olden days of sport, and the great example, a movie by the name of Major League, where Mr. Bob Uecker was the voice behind the radio. If you remember in that movie.
Bob Uecker, and don't forget his contemporaries, right? You could go back to the Vin Scullys. Remember, you could go back to those Ernie Harwell, those classic voices that defined the game for an entire fan base. And we were lucky enough to have two of them in Tom. Like, Ed, do you not appreciate how spoiled we were to have Tom Cheek
Oh,
and Jerry Howarth for as long as we did? If you're a Blue Jays fan, that's what it was all about. It was just the smooth, lustrous tonality and visceral reality that was the audio experience of Tom and Jerry. And we had
you
it
know
for so
what?
long. Oh, we had it for so
And
long.
it
So sweet.
wasn't just. I grew up. This is Tom and Jerry. Uh, then I transitioned in that I became part of what they were talking about, and then I became part of being in the same level as they were. Well, never the same level, but uh, in the same media box, asking them questions on how to do my job, uh, and relating to them, trying to get an expertise what I was supposed to do. And you know, the other day I ran into Jerry, and I said, Jerry, can you believe what happened to Mike Milner? Uh, Wilner? And he said, you know what? I, I give thank to God that I wasn't in working in this era,
This
because
era is right. Exactly. Well said. That's it. That's it in
because
a nutshell.
because it's a different mentality as to how the business is. And I don't like this business any longer.
Yeah. Especially when you know somebody like a Mike Wilner, he didn't strike me as being a company guy, right? I mean, he'd already there was that moment that many fans have forgotten where Wilner questioned, I think it was Cito Gaston during a press conference, during the second Cito Gaston Forsaken tour that never should have happened. Man, oh man, was that ever such a blatant effort to try to tap into the past by using not only a manager that no longer could catch up to the modern game, but one who didn't deserve to be treated by fans the way that he did. I could write you so many articles in the past that would outline the unfair reality that was Cito Gaston and the racism and so on and so forth. But what's interesting is that the industry, it's only looking now for people who will follow instructions. They're not interested in critical thinkers because the critical thinker might create a narrative that doesn't fall in with the party line for the big business that it is. And Wilner got in trouble He got, if you recall, he said certain things that the company didn't agree with. They censored him, they punished him, and then they brought him back and made him part of Jay's Talk, which only made things even more exciting for fans of the team, because now if you called in, Wilner did everything he could to be a contrarian. He didn't like groupthink. And I think in the end, that's what hurt him, because he didn't get promoted as quickly as he should have. His voice and talent was strong enough to succeed. Like, I'll say this, you may not like, some of your listeners may say, I'm not a fan of Mike Wilner, and that's cool. But there's no denying that the man is talented. He's a talent. He's a singular talent that they could have used to continue the radio side. But they decided they didn't want to do that. They wanted to save the money, because let's face it, he's been with the Blue Jays long enough that he probably was a significant part of their, you know, labor costs. See, that's what it all comes down to. That's why Jerry, I'm glad Jerry retired. This would have sullied him. This would have been beneath him. This kind of disrespect, this indignity for such a proud industry that produced such talented people who were willing to teach and learn. I mean, you know how many journalists there are out there who want to get into radio broadcasting? What message does this send to them, Ed? What message does this big, bloated, multinational conglomerate, ridiculous organization, faceless and unseen now? You know, it'd be one thing if Ted Rogers were around. It'd be another thing if even George Cope was still at the helm with Bell. But what they're doing now to me is just shameful. Because it's destroying a generation's hope and crippling an industry to the point where there just won't be a need for it anymore. Everyone's going to do live stream. You know, I jokingly went on my own feed and said I should start my own Blue Jays broadcast. Seriously. One where I do it my way. I live stream it to my followers through Patreon. I monetize it, and away you go. You see, they're insulting people's intelligence, because they're basically saying, we're going to decide your career ambitions. And this is where there's teachable moments here where people can start being more resilient and finding ways to do, for example, what you do, like have Spanglish around for people who are sick and tired for spending money on a product that just refuses to respect itself. Really, you got rid of your radio side. That's the whole part of the baseball experience. You know, this is a spit in the face of the game to just get rid of that entire, broadcasting division. That's wrong. That's
So,
business.
so I want to touch on that because, as you know, over the years, I have tried to put together many times. Toronto had been the only team in Major League Baseball that didn't have a Spanish side to its being. Uh, they had Chinese, Italian, Urdu, you name it, what other languages there were, but not the one that, in the case of the Blue Jays, that actually could bring some revenue, because we know that the majority, if not a large component of the team, is Hispanic. And I have always tried to speak to the Blue Jays as to have a Blue Jays broadcast in Spanish, whether it was TV or radio, that would bring that uh, closest to a community that is eager to spend in that area.
That
Uh,
makes you far more a noble man than any of the executives working for the big telcos. Because you're right. For all the years I've known you and for all the things that you've done, it's always about multiculturalism, about recognizing that when you take an organic game like baseball, you can appeal to so many different Ontarians and Canadians from coast to coast. There's only one baseball team in this country. This narrative would be completely different if there were like 6 different teams across 4 provinces, which, by the way, could totally sustain itself. It's just nobody wants to take the investment and grow their grassroots, right? The key to baseball for many years in Ontario and in Toronto specifically was catering to the grassroots of my generation and your generation and the children that followed. Because we grew up pretending to be Tony Fernandez turning a double play. We grew up swinging like George Bell, from the shoe tops, trying to hit a pitch that we had no earthly business trying to get. How many times we, being children of that generation, would like take a sharp single to right and pick it up and try to throw it like Jesse Barfield, So
yeah.
you had so many examples, and it was all being cultivated through radio. It wasn't cultivated through television. It's not like in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody was flocking. I mean, once the profile got raised, then the World Series numbers on television were astronomical. But before then, it was primarily listening to radio voices late at night. You know, how many times you enjoyed coming home after a long day and the game started a couple of hours early in Fenway Park and you hit the button in on the highway, bumper to bumper, and suddenly you hear, you know, Tom Cheek or Jerry Howarth. And then so it's a psychology. It's something that's supposed to cultivate interest in the game. It's an investment in the DNA of baseball, which is being ignored here. And it's unfortunate because it's all in the measure of cost cutting. Look, I love Buck Martinez. I think he does a phenomenal job. Dan Schulman was someone that I met many years ago and whose voice I admire because there are moments where I practice almost subconsciously speaking like him because he's got such a great bottom end lustrous voice and he knows how to control it. And then you got Pat Tabler, whom, you know, at this point, you know, regardless of your feelings about him, he helps complete that experience. But there's no reason for them to not have the radio broadcasts in trying to encourage people's interest in the game. And also the fact that you've already invested in great talent that's out there. You had Wilner, you've got Wagner, you've got Strasler, Goldberg, Strasler. I don't understand what they're thinking here other than we need to make sure a couple of executives get their Tahiti vacation in this year. Or maybe there's some kind of, you know, fun in Costa Rica. I don't know. I don't even know if these tourist spots apply anymore. The world's changed so much. There are a lot of places you can't go vacation anymore.
It's, and I'll talk to you about another voice I remember from is Fergie Oliver. You know,
Oh, Fergie Oliver. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Has there ever been a more enthusiastic journalistic presence in the history? I mean, Hazel May tries. She tries to radiate enthusiasm, and she's very, very resourceful because she also runs her own clothing line. So, you know, you don't want to get caught frowning in a really nice blouse. But when you think about Fergie Oliver, he would just show up in his suit, right? And he would just be happy, just buoyant. He would essentially say to everyone who was there, I'm enjoying this experience, so take it or leave it. You know, there was something so no nonsense about him. And then there's also the fact that, you know, by objective television standards, he came across as, you know, very dweebish, almost like a nerd-like love of the game. But it worked. It appealed to children, and it definitely appealed to our generation because we looked at that and we said, man, if a grown man could get this worked up about the sport of baseball, there's
yeah.
obviously something there.
So let me welcome our new. You are muted, Justin. Turn your mic on.
Hey, Eduardo.
Hey. So let me introduce both of you, but let me introduce him first to to our audience. I call Justin the ultimate authority on women's hockey in Canada. He is the one of the columnists for the Puck Authority, and now one of the chief collaborators for the Toronto Six Women's Hockey Club here in Toronto, Mr. Justin Levine. And Mr. Levine, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Ari Shapiro, who I call the authority on baseball in this country, in the area of podcasting.
Isn't he just the ultimate flatterer, Justin? I mean, all you do is just hit mute and listen to him. That's all you need to do. So, yeah, no, nice to meet you. It's ironic that somebody who's a puck authority would show up in the middle of a baseball conversation. So, as always, Ed, your timing, magnifico.
Nice to meet you too.
So, Ari, I had invited Justin because this is an interesting topic going on with women's hockey right now as it stands. The PWPA just launched a campaign in which they are trying to raise the level and raise the name women's hockey throughout this country and throughout North America. Um, they and it was endorsed by so many celebrities from the NHL to politicians and all the way around, which it really surprised me to see the quantity of celebrities that we had in that video. Just can you explain a little bit more of what's happening with the PHWPA?
What they're doing is a Dream Gap tour. As long as you can hear me, I'll just repeat myself again. They are doing a Dream Gap tour to, again, raise awareness for the best players in the world. And that starts this weekend tonight in New York. Tonight is, I don't know what the arena is called that they're doing it tonight, but tomorrow they're doing it at Madison Square Garden, home of the New York Rangers. And then next week they're at Fifth Third Arena in Chicago for game one, and game two at United Center, home of the Chicago Blackhawks. Again, this is part of a collaborative partnership with some NHL teams. And then when it's safe to do so, they will do so at Scotiabank Arena, home of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Meanwhile, the NWHL is off to the races with the championship weekend of their own, supposedly towards the end of March, according to some reports, but that's not yet finalized. So anyways, it's long story short, women's hockey is on the rise, and look forward to seeing it.
So this video that I came out with is stick in the ground. It's very interesting because it's not just about women's hockey, but it's about to raise awareness about the sport in general, and uh, to try to bring young fans into the arena of what's important in sport.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. It's about raising the attention to young fans and to just people in general, because again, as you saw in the stick in the ground video, you're looking at some of the high profile NHL players. So yeah, it's all about raising awareness and making sure that it's known that this high profile pro women's hockey is there and it's accessible. So I think that the campaign is a really interesting one. And I mean, it's important to get the message out there. And yes, the NWHL and the PWHP have, their own ways of doing it. But at the end of the day, it's all for the same message.
So, Ari, I was listening to some of your radio podcasts, and the last ones were in regards to the gentleman by the name of Mike Babcock and his antics after the fact, on how he is disappointed of how people are looking at his legacy. What do you think? Do you think that that's right in this point in time to try to elevate something that he knows that he did wrong?
Well, and let me just quickly start by saying that, Justin, it's about time. I'm really thrilled to hear that. I'm thrilled to hear that there's like legit momentum for supporting women's hockey in Canada, because I think it's just a terrible legacy that we see so much failure in organized leagues, for whatever reason, whether it's because they might be lacking leadership or money. The reality is that we were just talking about this before you joined the show. You have got to support the grassroots. Otherwise, your product wilts like a flower. You got to water it, you got to nurture it, it's got to have the soil. Women's hockey is a one of those things that for years I think has been maligned as, oh, we just can't get leagues and organized efforts to work. That's so not true. That's so not true. I think it just has to be women who get a chance to do that. I think men have been organizing it for so many years and the models haven't been working. I think the more women that are empowered to be part of it and be involved in it and have, either an active role, either playing the game or overseeing it, it's only going to help us. It's only going to help the sport. It's going to help society as a whole. So it's good that you've attached yourself to that crusade, because it will be a crusade, especially with coronavirus, because it's not easy to get funding for anything. But let's face it, this is the era of sports celebrity where one person's endorsement, bam, all of a sudden you got something snapping. Somebody who I don't endorse is someone who has a problem with his humility. And to answer your question, Ed, that's the problem with Mike Babcock. The guy doesn't have a humble bone in his body. And the truth is, before he came to Toronto, a lot of people questioned his legacy because there was always this asterisk attached where, he's the best coach in the world, presumably, and he's getting the most amount of money, but he's only won a single Stanley Cup with a nucleus of a team that very few, GMs and coaches get a chance to work with. Throw in the fact that Olympic medal, I don't know, maybe you or I could have stood behind the bench and won that Olympic gold medal. Sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time. And I think Mike Babcock throughout his career has been in the right place at the right time. I'm not going to take away the fact that he's a talented coach. You have to be to do what he did. But what frustrates me is he didn't do it in Toronto. it was abundantly obvious that there was no chemistry between what he was saying and what the players were producing on the ice. It just wasn't there. And then we learned that he used tactics and certain tutelage elements that none of us, the three of us in this conversation, would ever do, knowing that that is what your legacy is. And what is his legacy in Toronto? He really screwed things up and it didn't work out. And he made a lot of money and he made decisions which ultimately got him fired. And instead of saying, I made mistakes and I'm moving on and trying to be a better coach, he's been defending his legacy in a way where he's blaming it on other variables, that it was more in people's imagination that he was somehow directly responsible. I think he was. Ultimately, he was hired to do a job, and he was the highest paying coach in organized hockey on this planet. You'll forgive me if not getting past the first round of the playoffs 3 times in a row and having names like Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, and Morgan Riley on your roster makes me question whether or not you were really as good as people advertised, and maybe the game just passed him by. And I think that's what happened. If you look at Sheldon Keefe and the way he's handling the Toronto Maple Leafs today, you can easily make the case that he is more connected with the way hockey flows and is played and is regarded than Mike Babcock ever was. So it's unfortunate because that lack of humility is making him look really, really bad on social media. Like if you read stuff about Mike Babcock, you're like, how the hell did this guy go from hero to zero in the blink of an eye? Well, it's really simple. Humility. You got to have it. You got to know when to just say, I'm sorry, or know when to say what's on me. And then people will eventually move on and forget. But if you're going to say, well, don't blame me. I mean, we tanked to get Austin, and I was just trying to do my best, and I felt Mitch Marner wasn't working hard enough, so I asked him to make a list of the team's work ethic. Like, dude, you're no longer connected to the game the way you were. So just step away and acknowledge that. But to be defiant, and, the guy's got his pride too. That's the one thing about Mike Babcock you always appreciate when you hear him filled with ego and pride, and that's tough. It's tough for somebody like that to come across as ever being humble. So at the end of the day, I think it played out the way it had to. I just wish it would have happened sooner because I think there were a couple years early on that the Maple Leafs showed that with Sheldon Keefe, they could have been a lot more effective. But hey, here we are complaining with the team in first place overall in the NHL. So if it took Mike Babcock being mediocre for an extra couple of years and for us to realize that it wasn't a good fit to eventually get to the Stanley Cup Finals, I think the average fan would take it.
Justin.
Yeah, I mean, look, with Mike Babcock, he obviously character-wise, like you said, there have been some issues, but he was one of the highest paid coaches with Toronto, and he caused issues along the way. But again, he's a great coach, and that's why he gets paid the big dollars. But now he's with the University of Saskatchewan as their head coach of the men's program for the Huskies, and I'm interested to see what that looks like, especially after watching this documentary and seeing kind of trying to understand where his mind was at with the Toronto Maple Leafs and trying to understand what this future can hold, because again, these are student athletes and that could cause bigger issues than already had at NHL level with men. So really this could go either way. But something that I did hear is that after the Montreal Canadiens collectively fired Kirk Muller and Claude Julien, Babcock actually asked for a few days off of doing press and media after joining Saskatchewan because Montreal had approached him. So not saying anything is imminent, but and not saying he might be the Canadiens coach next year, but very well saying that could be an interesting possibility, and that might see him get his last shot at an NHL coaching job. And here's hoping, if so, he does it properly. And he said a lot of things, again, with Sportsnet, with NBC during his job as an analyst for a select few games this year. And so really all this talk, I want to see if anything actually improves. And I think that's the bottom line, because with youth sports, visibility is not easy, and nor do I really watch it. I watch a little bit of the stuff here in Ontario, but that's about the extent of it. So I want to see if anything in the NHL has changed, but time will tell.
Justin, leave it to the Montreal Canadiens, a franchise so utterly dysfunctional that they might even consider taking a flyer on Mike Babcock, because that would be a sad and delicious irony of franchise being so out of touch with what they have on the ice. Now, granted, the Canadiens are a very disciplined defensive team, so I could see Babcock actually having some success with them. But the current fellow they have, Dumarche, right? He's someone, or Ducharme, excuse me. He's someone who is very much like Sheldon Keefe, meaning he had huge minor league success. I think he won a Calder Memorial Cup. He was somebody that, demonstrated that he knows how to deal with young players. And he's had now a couple of years of experience behind Julian and being with Muller. So why wouldn't they just simply let that be an option? Why would they even consider going with a guy who clearly would only be getting back in the game because he'd love the opportunity to stop the Toronto Maple Leafs, which, by the way, would be a great narrative, wouldn't it? They get to the first round of the playoffs, they take on the dreaded Montreal Canadiens with Mike Babcock. You know what? Maybe they should do it. Forget what I just said. I like that idea. That would actually be the kind of super, media interest that would just fly off and go viral. But still, a really dumb thing if the Habs consider, don't you think?
A little bit of a dumb idea, yeah. And there's some better guys on that list. I mean, Andre Tourigny, who is the head coach of the Ottawa 600s in the OHL, we saw his uprise, at the World Juniors, and he's at the top of the list as a potential candidate. I'd love that. And then following him, you have guys like Guy Boucher, who I actually don't really like, but he talks French, so it is what
You're not the only one, yeah.
Yeah, he talks French, so the only reason they might even consider it is that. Patrick Waugh, who had last he was in Montreal, had attitude issues as a player. He said he'd be insensitive to returning, and he would know to put aside his emotions from that time, and because he's a grown man now, and that's what you'd expect. But words are words, and we have to see actions. But I don't know. Maybe Babcock's not the worst option. I don't know.
It's crazy to think, by the way, that the Montreal Canadiens have always had that golf handicap of having to consider the French side. I understand why they do it. It's a French franchise. It's a French hockey franchise first. French. I get that. But if you look at their last 10, 15 years of decision making, especially with drafting, and see how it's oriented towards this, that we're based more on the cultural reality than the strategic reality, it's really hurt them, hasn't it? Because think about all the decisions they'd be free to make if they made them like, the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hurt them. It's and again, this is a conversation I usually have a lot, especially these days, about the whole, Anglophone thing and how they're trying to, I don't know, some parts are trying to fix that. Some parts are, especially politically, just do not care to change that. And it's going to, in the end, hurt. And while I believe the Montreal Canadiens make an effort, it's not enough because they still feel they need to have a French coach to some degree because they still have RDS, TVS, Bolt, and other stations that, feel they must have French. And, what can you do? So
that's right. And in an alternate universe, Pierre-Luc Dubois is on the Canadiens, right? I mean, the fact that these things end up the way they do, even with the players that they target or really want, is sad because they end up getting great secondary options. Nobody thought Andrei Markov would become the legend that he did. But even as a legend in that market, he was minimized. He was really, at the end, if you think about it, a player of his caliber for what he brought to the table. If his name had been Andre Mercier, he would have been already enshrined somewhere and given sainthood. But because it was Markov, they were like, whatever, dude. Thanks for coming out. You were really kick-ass for a while, but you got old, and we'll say goodbye now.
So another topic I wanted to touch on with you, Justin, and for you, Ari, because you are going to enjoy this. But you're looking now at the Olympics for Beijing 22. It seems like Canada, they want to get rid of the Canadians of Canada as a whole early in the round because in the men's, just looking at the men's hockey right now, Canada is in Group A with the United States, Germany, and China. And the other groups look like, hey, let some of the guys through, the good guys through. Russia, Czechoslovakia, Switzerland, and a qualifier which hasn't been decided yet. Group B, and Group C is Finland, Sweden, and two qualifiers that haven't been decided yet. And in the women's is not any different. Because in the women's, Canada is amalgamated against United States, Finland, Russia, and Switzerland. And then Japan, qualifier 1, qualifier 2, qualifier 3, and China. Why couldn't Canada fall into the one of the qualifier groups instead of amalgamated amongst the all the reigning champions.
Well, you see Canada in Group A in both situations, and they're both very deserving. I mean, Canada, especially, I'll speak to Canada's women's team. Something I obviously follow a little bit closer is the fact that these are rosters full of stars, people who work day in and day out, and even the same could be said for the men's group, because these are NHL players who do the exact same thing, work day in and day out to perfect their game on the highest stage of pro hockey, the NHL. Meanwhile, you look at the women's side, and it's, again, some of the top players who, while this year hasn't been perfect, to say that they can work day in and day out because they barely played, which is unfortunate due to the pandemic. They're still national team players who have, great achievements to their resumes from the Olympics, from the World Championships, from the Rivalry Series, and other tournaments of which I may have left off. But again, you have to put these stuff into consideration when you're making such such notes for the groups. But when you look at groups such as, and I'll use the men and the women for this, such as like Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, that group, for the women's side, it's not as strong as it is the men's side, which is kind of interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are a few, but there aren't a lot. And when I say that, I mean, there aren't a lot of star players. There are some, like, for example, even a Finnish one, Nora Ratty, who is a goaltender. She's great. And then the Chinese side is very strong, but the Swedish side, not really. From Switzerland, not really a whole lot. So I don't know. That's at least for the women's side. The men's side is still, I think, very much developing. But again, it's about all how you construct and consider when you're making these groups.
I mean, it's just surprises that wouldn't you want to have a final with the top teams? If you group them all together into one slot in Group A, then you will tend not to have good competition at the end of those teams.
Are you really surprised though about that, Ed? I mean, the reality is that I don't think that's not the consideration anymore in how a lot of these organizations try to figure out is look at the NHL, right? Look at the North Division, for example, right? The Toronto Maple Leafs are in a division where they don't face the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Boston Bruins during the regular season. You know what that's like? That's like avoiding the highest standard of competition that will determine what your regular season will look like and where you'll be seated in the playoffs. And if there were any justice, you have to adapt to the circumstances. I mean, this was a decision that probably, I think you'll agree, Justin, gives the Maple Leafs their best chance in 54 years to win a Stanley Cup, because they'll be able to finish first overall in their division, end up, like you said, Ed, facing weak competition rather than the standard bearers. And if you look at it from a World Cup / Olympic perspective, who are the standard bearers? Well, you've got the Finns, you've got the Swedes, you've got the Russians, you've got teams that can be legitimate opponents. If you fuse the Czechs and the Slovaks together, you'd probably get the ultimate hockey team that could take on Canada. But instead, you've got a North Division where you look at the Maple Leafs, they're going to beat up on a lot of weak teams. Their only challenge on any given night might be the Montreal Canadiens, the Edmonton Oilers, let's say, or maybe the Winnipeg Jets. But they're going to end up destroying and annihilating the Ottawa Senators and the Calgary Flames and the Vancouver Canucks, probably the tune of 70% of their victories, 70% of the time. So if they do win the Stanley Cup, you can imagine people will argue, it was because of the way that the league was organized. And to Justin's point, that unfortunately is less about strategic intent and probably more about exposure and economics rather than, like you said, Ed, getting the best breed of competition.
And that's exactly what it's about. It's nothing to do with the competition itself. Again, it's all from a strategic perspective. And, that's simply what it comes down to.
So now that we touched on that level, I want to slowly go back, because I know, Justin, you do cover the AHL and the OHL. How are those leagues panning out right now in regards to what's going on? I know some of those kids are now facing that they are being called up more often than none to the NHL. And how are their leagues going hearing all the facts with the pandemic?
I'll start with the AHL because that's the more simple one. They are playing. The Canadian division is playing. The American division is playing. And, they're going with it. It's a little bit on the boring side, but it is what it is. And I look when you look at the NHL and you say it looks more like playoff hockey. The same can't be said for the AHL side. I mean, the Marlies got blown out 8-1 yesterday by the Stockton Heat in Calgary at the home of the Flames, the Scotiabank Saddledome, and that's rough. So they're going with it, but it's not playoff style hockey. They're just they're just playing, and here's hoping that it's we're safe next year to have a normal season, because 4 games and a blowout like that in the mid, which was actually their second loss of the series back to back, a little bit on the rough side, but nonetheless they're playing, so they're taking that for what it is. Now the OHL, I made a report a couple of weeks ago that they were intent on making a return with a couple of hub cities, including Kingston and St. Catharines. Then pending government approval, this would be the case with some different incentives. Anyways, long story short, Queen's Park officially rejected that a few days ago. And now there's a petition going around because a lot of the players are overseas at the moment. And so a lot of those players, they want to return. They want an OHL season to happen. But our government is making this really, really hard, as already has in months prior, because Lisa MacLeod, who is our director of culture and sport, she is I don't know. She's making this difficult, to say the least. She said a few months ago, if there's no body checking, that's one less incentive in order to make a safe return. But you can't have you can't have hockey without body checking. So the OHL itself rejected that. So it's been a lot of back and forth negotiating. And the OHL had a good plan. They were going to do 4 hub cities in smaller populated cities, and have players show up, do a home quarantine, then testing at their hotels every few days. I thought it was going to work. I thought it was smart, just from the things I was hearing. But again, it was rejected. So now they're doing a petition. A lot of players have signed it. It's getting a lot of attention. CBC has taken interest in it. And, it's all in an effort to gain traction, to tell our government, I mean, come on, this is enough already. Just, accept the plan that they had, because it's not going to get better than that. Because the alternative is do 2 hub cities, not 4 hub cities, which is increasing the amount of people, and that's not a good idea. So I don't know. I don't really get why that took place. And the OHL, the front office, David Branch and such, they're disappointed because of that. They're just discourages the many players who are experiencing anything from loneliness to depression to no motivation to do anything, as the petition read. And there was another article where a group of OHL parents, and again, GTHL parents and OHL parents are very different. GTHL parents speak up for their young kids. OHL parents don't have to, because their kids are old enough, but the OHL parents are starting to get just as rattled as their their teenage sons. And so it's like, where do you draw the line? And so it's getting we're getting sick of watching this, and it feels like it's just not going to happen at this point. And for the players, that sucks, because they are, like I just said, they're sick of this. And it's hard, because at the same time you have to consider the upcoming NHL draft, and those who are draft eligible are now either a select few of them are playing overseas but still not getting scouted, or else they're just not playing at all. So it's a very complicated situation, and it doesn't look like it's going to be resolved anytime soon.
Great. What do you think of all this dilemma that we are experiencing with minor league hockey?
I think that it's embarrassing, really, to think that by 2021 we haven't figured out a way for different, whether it's businesses, corporations, and government, coordinating their efforts to sustain something, especially when it comes to women's hockey, right? Because my understanding has been that for years it's been a real struggle to get anything organized and moving on that front, because leagues keep collapsing. When was the first thing we heard when the coronavirus hit? We started seeing this wilting of minor league movements. We look at the baseball side, for example, right? They couldn't even afford to continue with minor league games, and you had major league players stepping up and donating money to these organizations. Well, where was the league? right? Where was the leadership? Where were these elder statesmen of society that might be part of the government or part of, some community leadership group to say, hey, we want to keep this afloat? And so my thoughts that are, it's sad that it's scrambling and scuffling again. And I think it frustrates Justin, probably frustrates you enormously, Justin, because there's so much potential for this. And all it takes is a real leap of faith that you can get it working. And like any business, if it doesn't work, then at least, you walk away with your tail tucked between your legs. But you'd like to see government step up and really put some of this sustainable investment in people into our kids and into grassroots movements for playing hockey and playing baseball and playing basketball. And if we don't see that consistently, then we'll constantly have this narrative like, is it worth doing? Of course it's worth doing. The question is, where's the leadership and how it's getting done? Because I don't see that very often. I hear bickering and infighting more often than I do people coming up with great ideas.
What
That's what it
truly
looks like.
surprises me.
So, it's a question of when are we going to get to the point where that's no longer, the situation? And just like you said, and I'll add this, I spoke with an OHL parent the same day I made that report about what their season could look like. And the parent just simply asked me, what do you think? Do you think this is going to happen? Because her son is overseas, who I've been in touch with the last 48 hours. And, again, it's good pro experience, especially for an 18-year-old in this case, but still the point being, it's bickering. And I think the parents are starting to get just as tired as the players are of this.
It's hard when money's involved, right? There's always bickering when it comes to how you divide spoils or how you monetize something. So it's no surprise. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
What truly surprises me is that we do have leadership in hockey of great stars that are Canadian that could support this venture. I mean, you do have the Lemieux, you do have you know names that could either sway government or in their own power have organizations that could support the running of leagues and making sure that the government understands that they are going to take care of the situation along the way. But nobody has stepped up to the plate and done anything. And I think that's what government is looking at. If the people that played the game, that made their statue in the game, are not stepping up to the game, why should they do anything?
That's a great question. That's a fantastic question. Why we don't see more of that? Why is my most recent memory of an NHL player promoting something like Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon promoting Chicken McNuggets? Like, where are the priorities here? We don't need baseball or hockey cards that we buy at fast food places. What we need are the leaders of the sport stepping up and saying that this is important. We have to create these leagues and get them being eventually self-sustainable, because they have to be. Believe me, nobody wants to run a loser league where 4 years in you're bankrupt because you just didn't have the right investment strategy, or you couldn't appeal to people. But Canadians are hungry for hockey. Canadians love women's hockey in particular, and it's always an intriguingly enjoyable experience that differs from the male, the typical men's hockey experience in so many ways. So I agree with you. These leaders need to step up. The men in this case need to step up on behalf of the women and say, look, we're the ones with star power and collateral marketing capacity with our reputation and brand. Governments, wake up. Have Gretzky and Lemieux visit with Justin Trudeau, do a really great photo op, and from that raise millions of dollars and inject it into the league. I don't know, Justin, does it seem like rocket science? I don't think so. It's actually very simple. A plus B equals C.
It is very, very simple. And look, there have been conversations with the NHL for the longest time, but for the women's game, at least, this is the way Bettman and Daly think, because, it all comes down to money and some other nonsense that ultimately nobody cares about. But point being, they said, unless the NWHL folds, we're not doing anything, period, the end. So, with that, you have to remember, and I don't know how much you guys know about this, but when the CWHL was around, they gave $50K to them and the NWHL $50K. The CWHL shuts down, their $50K joins on to what they already gave the NWHL. That's as far as they're willing. That's not enough.
That's shenanigans. That's not serious economic or financial planning. That's definitely shenanigans.
So in that note, I want to acknowledge, because there is three big funders here. One is Dick Sports, in the US. One is Adidas now with the PWHPA, CBC, and NBC. I want to commend them because what they have done for women's hockey is beyond what anybody else has come through. They actually have come through and said, we will support you, we will sponsor you. And I want to remind of something that Justin taught me, which I didn't know until I read his stories on women's hockey. And it's that the women are getting paid from those sponsorships. That's the only pay that they get. And it's amazing that that players have accepted that type of remuneration in order to grow the sport. Uh, is commendable of the women. I have to say that if that would happen in hockey or basketball or baseball, this would be a better place right now, because it would be known that it's a league that wants to grow and grow their fan base the proper way. And it's thanks to Justin's articles on the Puck Authority and on other mediums that you learn this story. So I asked our viewership, read those stories, go to read the Puck Authority, go to read other publications where Justin writes, and see the ground roots of the game and how it's expanding and how it gets better.
Something I'll note is that my stories at toronto.nwhl.zone, where I continue to write. I've currently got 3 up. You really learn a lot about these players and the people that they are and their journeys from being kids to pro hockey players. And it's incredible. And yes, the same can be said about the PWHPA players, but about the NWHL, a lot of them aren't national team players or national team caliber players. So it's been a real pleasure of mine to get to take part in the Toronto Six organization in some way as a writer and get to know the players. And I've got another one on Macaulay Grant Mentis coming in the next probably the next 24 48 hours, and I think that it's really special, and you get to learn about how they've gone themselves into the positions they are today, and that's really special. And so from being a feature writer, I'm now also a media relations intern with them, and just being a part of this organization, like Digit said, fun, fast, and furious is how they think, and it's fun to be a part of that. And I look forward to seeing the #1 seed go and get that Isabel Cup in a few days. But until then, again, because I'm a women's hockey writer, enthusiast, and other things, those of you watching, go watch the Dream Cup tour this weekend. It's across Sportsnet, NHL Network, CBC, and wherever you find your stuff in the US, because that's not something I know about. But it's important to grow the game, and if they can do that, look, we're into year 2, and finally they've got some means of being able to start. So get out there and watch them, from home, obviously. So not get out there literally, and it gives. All these sponsorship dollars are helping to give them money to help them with all sorts of things. And I think that part of that salary split that they're doing for this particular series is really important, and that's kind of more where I'm alluding to. So just go out and support these women because they need it the same way the NWHL women need it. And we saw with the NWHL bubble in Lake Placid how their numbers some nights were 30 to 40K viewers, and that's incredible because that was Twitch alone, in addition to what they were hoping to do on NBC Sports before they collapsed the bubble. But they're looking to return. I've heard NBC Sports might be involved with their return for championship weekend, but I don't know. Time will tell. But lots of hope for the future of the women's game. And here's hoping that on the junior hockey front that they can find that progress themselves. But I don't know. I'm kind of losing hope with that one. So we'll see.
You're a real crusader, my friend. I wish you the best of luck. You're in a good space, Justin. You're one of the few people out there who are articulating something that a lot of us have known for a long time. And the only way to get any momentum, any real traction, is to make sure you write about it, that you do something about it, and hopefully it grows. because it's been a brutal time for women's hockey for a very long time now, and they deserve better. You know, we've got to stop with this fakeness we have where we laud them and talk about all the great athletes in the past, the Wickenheisers and so on and so forth. But really, what does it mean if the state of hockey that it is in today continues? Nothing. That's not how you honor the legacy of what women from previous generations have done. So if men and women can unite, good things will happen.
Completely
So
agree.
I am going to put Justin on the spot right now because we know that people want to know about women's hockey. And I know that Justin used to do a show with us here, but due to his current commitments with the Toronto Six, it has taken him away for a little while. But we have been talking with Justin to try to get women's hockey back on the scale. And Justin, I am welcoming you back to our humble home. And can you tell us when can we expect the PWHPA, the Toronto Six, and the NHL back on our midst?
I'm hoping that that would be this coming week. Again, I say that optimistically. Again, I've been really kind of busy recently, like you said, with obligations to the Toronto Six recently, especially now that they're planning a return. Who knows where this is going, but hoping to give a season preview of sorts for them and a recap of week one and a preview of weekend number 2 for the Dream Gap Tour. So optimistically, I say this week, but I don't know. We'll see if that changes.
No problem. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I have to bid you farewell to all our viewers. We thank you very much for watching Spanglish Sports World Live with Mr. Ari Shapiro and with Mr. Justin Levine. It has been a very entertaining morning into the morning and a good start of the afternoon. And I just want to remind you that this show can be heard across the Spanglish World Radio Network and its social media sponsors as well. Remember that you can go to SpanglishSportsWorld.com for all the news and read the stories of great articles by Justin Levine and other columnists on this network. Remember also that Spanglish Sports World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it, because Spanglish Sports World is sport, and sport is Spanglish Sports World. In the name of Ari Shapiro and Justin Levine and the rest of our great staff, I bid you a great afternoon, and please remain at home, remain safe and in good health during these pandemic times of COVID-19.